I can't help falling in love with you.
Morning arrived quietly inside the vast backstage halls of America's Got Talent, where lights still slept and the air carried the scent of metal stands, dusty curtains, and yesterday's applause. Before the cameras, before the excitement, before the world awakened, one man moved through the silence with gentle footsteps and a mop in his hand. His name was Miguel Santos, a Filipino janitor in his late 40s, whose presence blended so seamlessly into the shadows that most people barely noticed when he passed. Miguel's uniform was simple, worn at the edges, carrying tiny stains from lives lived in service. Yet beneath that uniform lived a story far bigger than any stage he ever cleaned. His eyes, soft and tired, held the weight of years spent chasing survival instead of dreams. He had once stood barefoot on the cracked floors of a tiny Philippine village, singing Elvis songs on a cheap transistor radio, imagining the roar of crowds he would never meet. But dreams faded quickly when real life demanded sacrifice. His father's early death, his mother's illness, and the birth of his daughter pushed him into adulthood long before he was ready. Music soon became a quiet memory, tucked away behind the responsibilities that life built around him. He worked construction jobs, delivery shifts, and late-night labor until he finally landed a janitor position in America: steady pay, steady hours, steady loneliness. Yet the music inside him never disappeared. Every night after his shift ended, Miguel found an empty storage room, closed the door, and sang softly into the darkness. His voice carried a tenderness untouched by fame, shaped instead by the ache of years, the longing of distance, and the quiet hope that maybe, somehow, something beautiful could still rise from the life he had been given. As he pushed his cleaning cart through the grand stage of AGT, the floor shimmered beneath the lights he had polished countless times. He admired the stage from a distance, knowing he would never belong to the world that stood on it. But something inside him, something fragile, hidden, stubborn, still believed that the voice he carried was more than a forgotten memory. And so, in the stillness of that morning, Miguel paused for a moment. He looked at the massive stage, the empty seats, the untouched silence. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to imagine what it would feel. Evening settled slowly over the AGT building, painting the hallways with soft amber light. Most contestants had already left, their laughter echoing faintly in the distance as the day's excitement faded into quiet corridors. Backstage, only a few crew members remained, wrapping cables and stacking equipment for the next day. And in the middle of that soft, dying noise, Miguel returned to the stage with his mop and bucket, ready for another unnoticed shift. He moved with calm familiarity, cleaning row after row with steady hands. The spotlight above was still on, left behind by accident, casting a wide circle of light directly onto the stage floor. As Miguel worked his way across the stage, he paused inside that glowing circle. Something about the light felt different tonight, warmer, inviting, almost calling him. The same way music once called him when he was a boy with dreams far bigger than his circumstances. His eyes drifted upward toward the empty seats, imagining faces he had never met. The silence felt heavy, yet strangely comforting. In that stillness, the part of him that had been buried under years of responsibility stirred again. Without meaning to, he hummed a familiar melody, an old Elvis tune he had sung 1,000 times in private. His voice, soft at first, floated through the quiet hall like a secret carried by the air. What he didn't know was that Lara, a young stage assistant who often crossed paths with him, stood a few steps behind him. She had always been kind to him in small ways, a smile, a wave, a leftover cup of coffee. Tonight, she stopped in her tracks, stunned by the sound she heard. Miguel's humming grew stronger, deeper, shaped by years of emotion he never shared with anyone. It was a voice unpolished by fame, yet purified by hardship and heart. Lara's breath caught. She had watched countless performers audition, but something about Miguel's voice carried a different kind of truth. She felt an instinct, a pull, as if destiny itself had left a door slightly open, and Miguel didn't even know it. She watched him quietly, realizing that the man who cleaned the floors might be the greatest undiscovered performer this stage had ever held. The thought stayed with her, growing into certainty. Before Miguel finished his shift, Lara made a decision that would change both of their lives. She went to the registration desk and filled out an audition entry form, with Miguel's name on it. Later, when she handed him the slip, Miguel stared at it in stunned disbelief. The world around him seemed to slow. His hands trembled, not from fear of failure, but from the terrifying possibility that this might be the moment he had never allowed himself to dream. The day of the audition arrived with a weight Miguel felt deep in his chest. From the moment he woke up, nothing felt familiar. The world seemed louder, the air heavier, and every sound around him carried a reminder of what waited ahead. He had cleaned this building for years, but today, he was entering it as someone he had never dared to be. Backstage, contestants buzzed with nervous excitement. Some practiced warm-ups, others paced in circles, and some whispered last-second prayers under their breath. Miguel stood quietly among them, holding the small audition badge Lara had given him. It felt unreal, almost like he had wandered into the wrong life, into a doorway that was never meant for him. His janitor shoes, still marked with faint scuffs from endless shifts, contrasted sharply with the polished heels and performance outfits around him. He felt both invisible and exposed at the same time. Yet in his heart, something fragile kept him anchored, a belief so faint it barely had a shape, but strong enough to keep him from turning back. When his number was finally called, Miguel felt the world pause. The hallway leading to the stage stretched before him like a long, glowing tunnel. At the end of it, bright white light spilled through the doorway, almost blinding. He stepped forward slowly, each footstep echoing with every year he had spent silencing his own dreams. Inside the arena, thousands of eyes watched him enter. The judges' table glowed under the lights, their faces curious, unsure, and slightly puzzled. They saw a man in a simple uniform, someone who looked more like he had wandered onto the stage by mistake than someone who belonged there. The audience shifted in their seats, not certain what to expect. Some leaned forward, others exchanged quick glances, as if already preparing for disappointment. The cameras focused tightly on Miguel's face, capturing the nervous rise of his breath, the tremble in his hands, the quiet battle taking place inside his heart. He stood at the center of the stage, and for a moment, silence wrapped around him like a fragile shell. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. He was no longer cleaning around the spotlight, he was standing inside it. Then the music team signaled they were ready. A soft Elvis instrumental began to fill the room, rising gently like a memory returning from far away. Miguel closed his eyes for a brief second. Not to escape, but to remember the little boy in the Philippines who once believed he could sing to the world. When he opened them again, he was no longer a janitor walking onto a stage. He was a man stepping into the moment his entire life had been quietly leading him toward. The first note slipped from Miguel's throat like a quiet secret released into the air. It was soft at the beginning, shaped by caution, trembling with uncertainty. But inside that single sound lived years of longing, miles of distance, and a lifetime of unspoken dreams. It carried the weight of a man who had never been heard, until now. Within the first few seconds, a subtle shift moved through the auditorium. A ripple, almost invisible, flowed across faces that had expected nothing. The judges leaned slightly forward, their expressions softening in surprise. The audience stilled, sensing something they could not yet explain. It was as if the air itself paused, listening. By the sixth second, Miguel's voice deepened, revealing a tone polished not by studios or teachers, but by the rawness of experience. His voice seemed to reach into the quiet places inside every listener, the places where people stored their own forgotten dreams and hidden ache. It was a voice that understood loss and hope at the same time. At the 10th second, everything changed. The auditorium, once restless, doubtful, unexpected, fell into a stunned silence. Faces softened, lips parted, eyes widened. The transformation was instant, overwhelming, and undeniable. People who had barely glanced at him now watched with breathless attention. The judges' expressions shifted into awe, almost disbelief, as if they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered long after the echo faded. Miguel stood grounded in the center of the stage, his body still gentle and humble, but his voice soared far beyond the limitations of his uniform. Every note carried a quiet story, his mother working late nights, his daughter waiting across an ocean, the long lonely hours he spent mopping floors, humming songs into empty rooms where no one heard him. The more he sang, the more the audience felt their hearts tighten. Tears gathered on cheeks without warning. Even crew members backstage stopped moving, drawn toward the sound. Security officers, usually stoic and expressionless, lowered their radios, listening like they had forgotten their jobs for a moment. His voice broke through barriers, across language, age, and expectation. It felt familiar, yet new. Nostalgic, yet reborn. It was as if Elvis himself had returned in a form no one could have predicted, through a Filipino janitor who had spent his life hidden behind closed doors. As Miguel reached the emotional peak of the song, the room rose around him in a wave of emotion. The audience stood, unable to hold back the impact. Simon Cowell, known for his guarded reactions, watched with an intensity that carried both shock and admiration. And when Miguel delivered the final note, pure and trembling with truth, it hung in the air like a prayer. That was the moment. The exact second. When Simon stepped forward and struck the golden buzzer. Confetti exploded above him, swirling through beams of golden light as if the universe itself had opened in. The moment the golden confetti touched the stage, Miguel's life began to shift in ways he had never imagined. He stood there, still in his janitor uniform, surrounded by falling gold that clung to his shoulders like blessings long overdue. The auditorium trembled with applause, rising and falling like waves of gratitude directed toward a man who had only ever asked life for enough to survive. Backstage, crew members wiped their eyes, overwhelmed by the purity of what they had witnessed. Security guards exchanged small, silent smiles. Even contestants who had spent weeks perfecting their performances watched with softened expressions, understanding that they had just witnessed a moment beyond talent, something deeply human, something rare. Within minutes, the video of Miguel's performance spread across social media. Phones lit up in the audience as people recorded, shared, and wrote heartfelt messages about the janitor who sang like a legend. By the time the show ended that night, millions had already seen him. By dawn, the world knew his name. Across the ocean in the Philippines, his daughter sat in a small living room with his mother beside her. The old television flickered with grainy colors, but the moment Miguel stepped into view, the picture seemed brighter. They watched with trembling hands, tears streaming down faces that had waited years to see him, not just as the provider who sent money home, but as the man he truly was. In the village where Miguel once sang barefoot as a boy, neighbors gathered outside their homes, cheering into the night. Some recognized the way he tilted his head when he sang. Others remembered the young boy with the big voice who used to serenade the rice fields. Now that same voice echoed across the world, reaching hearts far beyond the borders of the place where his dreams began. News outlets reported his story. Comment sections flooded with encouragement. Strangers wrote about how his voice reminded them of their own forgotten dreams. Families watched together, feeling a strange warmth fill their living rooms. For a moment, the world paused, not for controversy or tragedy, but for a simple, powerful reminder of what hope looked like. And as Miguel walked onto the AGT stage for the next round, this time not as a janitor but as a performer, he felt a shift inside him. He still carried humility, still moved with gentle steps, still kept his heart quiet and soft. But now the world saw him. Now his dream breathed freely. Now the silence he once sang into had transformed into millions of listening ears. His journey, once hidden in the shadows of backstage hallways, now stood in the full brightness of a global spotlight. And through every heartbeat, Miguel understood something deeper than victory. Dreams do not disappear. They wait, quietly, patiently. For the moment a person finally believes they deserve to be heard.